The UN is again pushing its peace plan for Libya, but warlord Khalifa Haftar is threatening a final offensive on the capital, Tripoli. And Turkey is planning to step up its support for the internationally recognised government. So is the situation about to get worse rather than better? This is Inside Story. Hello there, I'm James Bays. 8 months ago, warlord Khalifa Haftar's forces defiantly marched towards Libya's capital, Tripoli. Their aim to unseat the internationally recognised government of Fayez Al Serraj. But after several bouts of fighting, the battle lines haven't shifted much, and at least 1,000 people have been killed and many more displaced. Now Haftar says he's launching a final push to tip the balance. That offensive could lead to both sides getting more military support from different countries in violation of a UN arms embargo on Libya. Turkey says it's ready to send troops to boost Sarraj's forces. This is what President Recep Tayyip Erdogan had to say.
With these agreements, the rights of both Turkey and Libya will be protected in the Mediterranean. The individual called Haftar is definitely not a legitimate president or prime minister. He is just a person who appears to be illegitimate.
The move by Turkey comes just a few days after the warlord Khalifa Haftar announced his latest plan for the offensive to take the capital.
We announced the decisive battle and the advancement towards the heart of the capital to set it free. We will break its chains, free its hostages and spread happiness in the heart of its people. Tripoli will return to the historical light it once was, becoming a capital for culture. We will raise the flag of victory throughout its squares, closing the pages of injustice, misery and defeat. With victory, we announce the birth of a new era. So advance now, advance now, advance our heroes.
So let's start the discussion and bring in our experts. We have Mustafa Fattouri, an independent Libyan academic and contributor to Al Monitor. He joins us from Paris. Mehmet Çelik is the managing editor of the Daily Sabah newspaper. He joins us from Skype from Istanbul. And joining us from London is Ludovico Carlino, senior analyst for Middle East and North Africa at IHS Markit, that is a consultancy. Well, we have two important developments in Libya. One of them is the announcement from General Haftar that he's going to try again to retake Tripoli, and the other is the deal that's been done between the GNA government in Tripoli and Turkey. If I can start with you, Mustafa, first, to talk about General Haftar and his announcement last week. He first tried to take Tripoli very defiantly in a surprise attack in April. He didn't succeed. Will he succeed this time?
Well, thank you for having me, James. First of all, I doubt he will give up. That's the first point. But whether he will succeed or not, I think he's determined to succeed. The possibility of him succeeding in taking Tripoli soon is, depends on many factors. But we have to remember, James, a very important point here, that the foreign minister of the government of National Accord in Tripoli, Mr. Mohammed Siala, on the 7th of December, just a week ago, an interview in Rome, he mentioned, which is something very rare, he usually rarely says, and that is when he asked about the fall of Tripoli to Haftar, he said it's very serious possibility. And I know from my sources on the ground, it's very serious possibility. But the only thing I can say with 100% certainty is that Mr. Haftar will not give up. But when could he actually march into the heart of Tripoli, inside the city itself? It depends on so many other factors, but it's very difficult to predict, as we have seen so far.
OK, Ludovico, if I can ask you, what's your assessment of the military situation around Tripoli right now and the balance of forces?
I can say that we are still in a phase of pretty much stalemate from a military standpoint. And if we look at previous LNA, which is the coalition of militias that Haftar is leading, operation that they have been conducting in the past in cities like Benghazi and Derna, it took a very long time and a massive destruction of the cities before declaring a victory. And I think that we are still in this case. Haftar is not going to give up. I agree with that assessment, but I think it's going to take time. And my view is that a much more destructive conflict over Tripoli is going to happen, is on the horizon. And this is not just because of the LNA probably incapability to take the city and the strong resistance that we have seen in this month, but it's because of the increasing foreign involvement that, is now characterizing the Libyan conflict.
And Ludovico, just to follow up with you, we mentioned the LNA, the Libyan National Army, but it's not really a united army, is it?
It's not an army, yes, it's correct. It's much more a kind of plethora of different militias, which so far have been united by the charisma of Haftar and this idea that is bringing into the fore a much powerful army able to counterbalance what we have on the other side, which is the UN-recognized government of the GNA, which in the same way doesn't have an army. So we are in a situation of two different coalitions of different militias which are fighting for the control of the country.
Mehmet, can I try and get the view there in Turkey? Because clearly they are worried about Tripoli, otherwise they wouldn't be announcing some of the measures that they are now announcing.
Well, I think that these new measures will basically, whether or not they will come to materialize will depend on how far the government in Tripoli is able to stand on its feet. Because if the Haftar forces are able to actually eliminate that government, then Turkey will have no partners that they can cooperate with in Libya. So it is very significant and crucial for Turkey's position in its cooperation with the UN-backed government, and how far Haftar can move, and whether they can actually take Tripoli or not.
Okay, Mehmet, so perhaps you should explain for our viewers what Turkey is actually discussing with the GNA government and Prime Minister Sarraj. Tell us first, because there's two elements, there's a maritime element and a military element. Tell us about the military element.
So the military element, Turkey has agreed with the UN-backed government in Libya to enhance their cooperation with regards to training, with regards to defense industry, with regards to actually establishing a quick response force, which can even lead up to Turkey deploying forces to Libya to support the UN-backed government. So that's one part of the deal, one of the deals Turkey has achieved. But also Turkey has agreed on a maritime deal, which is basically a designated zone between Turkey's and Libya's continental shelf, basically across from each other, where they can actually carry out joint economic ventures together and be able to control that area. So really, when you look at these two agreements, they are a result of what has been happening in a broader scale in the Mediterranean waters, in the Eastern Mediterranean, for example, with regards to the alliances between Greece, Israel, and Egypt, and also, if we look at the bigger picture, we can see the Egyptian and UAE rivalry against Turkey in the region, which also has an effect in the fight in Libya. So whether or not these will actually materialize are really dependent on how far or how long the GNA will stand against Haftar forces. So
okay, can I bring in Mustafa now? Mustafa, already so many different actors have interests in Libya, and now with this maritime agreement, you've got Greece, Egypt, and Cyprus. Two of those countries weren't really heavily involved. Israel is taking, I think, some serious concern about what's going on. This is going to even further drag in other powers in the region, isn't it?
Well, it's very likely, and most of the countries you mentioned, particularly Greece, are not very happy about what happened, and they are questioning not only the legitimacy of the deal itself, but also the legitimacy of the government, GNA part, the government in Tripoli, that signed it, as we heard from the Egyptian Foreign Ministry last week. And we have to remember also Athens expelled the Libyan ambassador to Athens about 10 days ago, I think, over the deal. But it's very, James, it's very complicated issue, as well as very suspicious what the government of National Accord and Tripoli has done with the Turks for several reasons. I will mention just a couple of them. One of them is when you look at the map and the Eastern Mediterranean, you find the Greek island of Crete is actually, which is geographically very close to Libya, about 200 kilometers northeast of Libya, I think. It's in the middle of this so-called exclusive economic zone GNA and Turkey is trying to draw up. And the overall picture is that, in my own analysis and information as well, Mr. Erdogan used this deal, if you like, as tangling it before the eyes of the government in Tripoli, which is desperate for any help in terms of security and military help, in order for him to get them to actually blackmailing them to sign the security agreement, which they did.
Ludovico, if I can bring in Ludovico now. Ludovico, the military part of this, Turkey potentially sending a quick reaction force to Tripoli. Actually, how easy would that be for Turkey to deploy that force? One assumes they'd have to try and do it by sea potentially, because Haftar mainly controls the air. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct. But I mean, ships coming from Turkey and supplying weapons to Libya have been calling a Miserat and Tripoli for such a long time now that I don't think it's going to be problematic. I think that the main problem here is going to be the consequences of Turkey deploying troops in Libya. It's not the first time that we see foreign troops in Libya. Presence of Russian mercenaries have been documented. We also know that Sudanese forces and Chadian mercenaries are fighting in Libya. The UAE has a big role as well. But this will be the first time that a country openly will send troops in Libya, and this is probably going to trigger a new escalation in the sense of foreign involvement in Libya. And I think this is the much complicated issue, because it's going to slow down even more a diplomatic process that at the moment is completely dead.
Yeah, you mentioned some of those details of who's involved in Libya. This very interesting report came out, finally was published last week, although I'm normally based at the UN and most of us journalists there managed to get a copy of it in advance. It's the panel of experts. This is set up by the UN Security Council to try and find out what's really going on. Let me quote you from this report. Jordan, Turkey and the United Arab Emirates have routinely and sometimes blatantly supplied weapons, employing little effort to disguise the source. The panel also identified the presence of Chadian and Sudanese armed groups in support of forces affiliated with the GNA and LNA alike. Mehmet, quite damning stuff there, because of course Turkey is supporting the internationally recognised government, but the other part of the international law there, the numerous UN Security Council resolutions, is there's a total arms embargo. No one is allowed to send arms to any of the parties in Libya.
Well, first of all, I want to clarify a point with regards to the exclusive economic zone between Turkey and with regards to the maritime deal. First of all, it depends how we interpret the international law, international maritime law, whether we take the islands as the mainland or do we take the mainland and measure the continental shelf there. So that's a point with regards to the Greek island. When it comes to the sending troops to support the Libyan government, I mean, this has been the main argument of Russia being present in Syria. The fact that a government whether we recognize them or not, or a government in the UN has invited Russia to support Syria on the ground. So Turkey, if there is an internationally recognized government.
Mehmet, you've made your point. Mustafa, you want to respond?
I haven't made my point.
Well, you can come back in a moment. You can in a moment, Mustafa.
Okay.
But I'm not sure how you will respond if I haven't made my point
Forget
yet.
the idea of
I'll come back to
the continental shelf between. Let me say the UN recognized this sentence we always have preceding the name of the government in Tripoli. The UN recognized government. Well, the source of legitimacy is the national recognition of the government itself. Whether it's whether it has been it was voted on by the legitimate legislator, which is the parliament in Eastern Libya. And we have to remember that the political agreement that was signed in Sarraj in Morocco on the 17th of December, the third anniversary of which is tomorrow, insisted in Article 3 of the agreement that the government, the Presidential Council, actually, it's not the government, should gain the confidence of the parliament in Eastern Libya by vote, by open vote. That never happened. That's one thing. The other thing is, if we are going to stick to the idea that because this government is recognized by the UN, which was a big mistake in the party of the UN, then the whole thing will just collapse. It doesn't. That mean the legitimacy of national governments in any country does not mean anything anymore. We don't.
Okay, Mustafa. Okay, Mustafa. I'm sorry. Everyone's got to have a say, and we've got to keep this moving on. Mustafa, I want to bring Mehmet back. I want to bring Mehmet back in. And before I bring Mehmet back in, you say internationally recognised. Where does that come from? It comes from the UN Security Council and their resolutions, which are legally binding. Mehmet.
Well, I know, but
Mehmet, sorry, Mustafa, we have to all have a go. Mehmet's turn.
Okay, sorry.
So, I mean, I don't know where we have left the discussions at this point, but what I want to underline is that Turkey has made a deal, actually two deals, one maritime deal and a military deal with Libya, with the Libyan government, which is, like you said, internationally recognized and legally binding when this decision is made by the UN Security Council. So if we look at the small details on the ground, we can actually lose ourselves in it, because the situation, like my previous speaker said, very complex on the ground. But if we look at the bigger picture, we can see a huge foreign involvement. You've mentioned some names of the countries, but there's actually more countries. Like France, for example, is also, there's been reports that for exposing their involvement in Libya. So if we look at the bigger picture, we can see a huge foreign involvement. For Libya to actually reach stability, a national consensus must be established around, internationally backed government, and the international actors in Libya must decide how this will be
Mr. Erdogan is doing does not help that national consensus.
Come on.
If I'm not able to put my points across.
No, but you have put your point across, and we have to bring everyone into this discussion. Ludovico, when we go back to that panel of experts report, and we've mentioned, both of the other guests have mentioned all of the different countries that are now involved in it. What is interesting is that there's no mention of those Russian mercenaries that we know are supporting Haftar in this UN report. And I've done a bit of digging at the UN, and I'm being told, no, the panel of experts are working on that. They just didn't have the evidence together. But how much of a game changer do you think is the involvement of Russia supporting Haftar at this stage?
Well, I think that if the level of Russian involvement in the sense of the Wagner company is reaching the level that we have seen now on social media, there's plenty of evidence, and they suggest that Russian troops or Russian Wagner company's troops are actually fighting on the front line in southern Tripoli, that can be a kind of game changer in giving the LNA much more power to finally enter Tripoli. But we also have to highlight the fact that the violations of the UN resolution and the arms embargo for Libya is not something new. It's not the first report by the UN panel of experts highlighting this continuation of violation with regards to Libya. And this is something that has to do with the arm embargo, has to do with the violation of human rights. So we are in a very complicated situation in which everyone is actually not abiding to international law.
Mehmet, I'd like to bring you in again, specifically on the Russians, because the dynamics between the Russians and Turkey, not just on Libya, but Syria as well, it's a most complicated love-hate relationship, isn't it?
Oh, that you've put it very well. It is a love and hate relationship. So, but the good thing here is the fact that Mr. Erdogan and Mr. Putin are able to use their pragmatic, diplomatic, how do you say, persona out there, and they're able to actually communicate despite their disagreements. So how this will unfold in Libya, I think it's something that we have to wait and see, because yes, in Syria, they have been on the opposite sides, but they have been able to agree on certain terms in Libya, in Idlib, for example, or in the northern Syria. But how this will unfold in Libya is something that will, again, depend on, I think, the leaders of the two countries, how they will be able to keep the diplomatic channels open, and whether they will able to compromise from each other's position to reach a solution there. Otherwise, if Turkey comes to a confrontation with the Russian-backed forces, and there is a direct involvement of the two militaries there, that will complicate things between the two countries.
Okay, but let me bring in Mustafa, the person who clearly, I think, has the hardest job, or at least one of the hardest jobs, is the UN envoy, Ghassan Salameh. He had a plan in April. It was completely torpedoed by Haftar's actions. Now he's planning to have an international conference in Berlin. That's been repeatedly delayed. Then he's trying to get the Libyan parties together. Then he's supposed to organise a constitutional referendum. Then he's supposed to have an election. Is any of that going to happen, Mustafa?
Well, I doubt it very much. I doubt it. But plus the fact that what is really Mr. Ghassan Salameh is after from the Berlin conference, whenever it takes place, is two important issues, you know, regardless of what the political process inside Libya itself. One is the international recommitment, if you like, again, to reinforce the embargo on Libya. Supply of arms, supply of fighters and ammunition into the country should be stopped and should be in a verifiable way. And the other one is probably most likely if he can get all countries concerned about Libya, like Turkey, international powers like France, local regional countries like Egypt and the United Arab Emirates, if he can get them somehow to keep away from the hot potato inside Libya and stop proposing even ideas for him. He has enough ideas to solve the process, the conflict, if only he gets the help from those countries.
Okay, Mustafa. Mustafa, we're coming towards the end. Mustafa, we're coming towards the end of our discussion, and I'd like very quickly, because this has been an appalling time for Libyans. 42 years of Gaddafi, almost 9 years of conflict and chaos. Really, just in a sentence each. Do you have any hope that things are going to get better, or are they going to get worse? Better or worse, Mustafa?
Well, I think it will get better, but only through force, unfortunately.
Okay.
There is no other way.
Mehmet,
even if restarted, it will not yield anything.
I said you had to be brief. Mehmet, do you think it's going to get better or worse? Any hope for Libyans?
Well, I always like to keep the hopes high, but we may have to go through the difficult road for a better day in Libya.
Ludovico, your prediction of where things stand, do you think things are going to get better or worse?
My view is that it will be actually a deterioration of the situation in Libya up to the conference that the UN is trying to organize.
Thank you to all our guests, Mustafa Fattouri, Mehmet Çelik and Ludovico Carlino. A fascinating topic on the worrying situation in Libya. You can watch this and other editions of Inside Story anytime by visiting our website. Look down there, aljazeera.com. We're on Facebook. facebook.com/AJ Inside Story, and find us on Twitter. We're at AJ Inside Story. From all the team here in Doha, and from me, James Bays, see you soon.